Some in the media have suggested that Juan Soto should consider changing positions if Pete Alonso leaves. We're going to break it down and give you our opinions next on Metcast. What's going on, Met fans? As always, I am Ray, and welcome back to another episode of Metcast. All I ask you to do is like and subscribe. Make sure you leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on this segment in regard to Juan Soto potentially changing positions. And before we get into it, I want to give a little bit of a monologue here and a preface. Yes, this is based off of potentially losing Pete Alonso, but let's not forget, there are a ton of other options out there to potentially replace Alonso. But yes, let me preface this before you spam the comments below. I do want Pete Alonso back, but when you're looking at the current projections, potentially a 6-year, $177+ million contract that Pete Alonso could potentially be seeking, at least that's the rumors out there. It's got to get you thinking, where else could David Stearns potentially pivot to make this team better, not only now, but in the future? We have to remember one thing that Steve Cohen has said in the past. You need to be careful about how many long-term contracts you have on one single team. And when you look at the New York Mets, Brandon Nimmo's locked up for 5 years, Lindor's locked up long-term, Soto's locked up long-term. So you already have 3 long-term contracts on this team. Do you want to make another guy in his 30s already a long-term solution? Now, if it's me, I would give Pete Alonso maximum 5 years. If somebody's going to offer him 6, it depends on who it is. If it's a division rival, the New York Yankees, maybe you have to consider going a little bit more. But if it's the Los Angeles Angels or, the A's or Seattle, you got to consider letting him go, because I understand what Pete Alonso means to this fan base, but you got to think with your head. But we could get that to another time. The folks over at SNY talked about Juan Soto potentially switching positions and potentially now. So let's listen to what they have to say, and we'll give you our talk. Let's listen.
Creative idea. So David Stearns has talked about wanting to prioritize run prevention, which is not just pitching, but defense. And that gets at, we've talked on this show, how do you get the defense to be better when all those guys are under contract? The one who isn't is Pete Alonso. If you let him walk, you have first base open. I would love to see the Mets talk to Juan Soto about transitioning to first base. Yes.
Let me ask you this, though. It's very, very simple to ask a guy like Juan Soto to transition to first base. That doesn't mean he could play the position. First base could actually be quite demanding. Learning to pick a ball, the proper footwork, when to attack a ball, when to let the second baseman get it and cover first base. Well, you have to hit a moving target like Pete Alonso hasn't been able to do his entire major league career with the New York Mets. Is not as simple as just doing that. A guy like Bryce Harper, a lot of people like to pivot to and say, well, he transitioned. In my opinion, he's not the greatest of first basemen, and I think he's a little bit better of an overall athlete than Juan Soto. The speed's a little bit there, maybe the quickness. We all know about Harper's rocket arm, so the athleticism might be a little more. And I'm not totally sold on this, but let's keep going.
Already, I know he's only in the second year of his contract and he's still in his 20s, but he is a bad defensive outfielder. By StatCast metrics, he was the Mets' worst defensive player last year. And you see, they had him take some ground balls at first base this year. If you move him to first base next year, you are prolonging the time that he's not clogging up the DH spot, and you're opening up.
I think it's a little ridiculous to even talk about the DH spot right now. Juan Soto's going into his age 27 season. That's potentially 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34. You have so many years before even considering moving him. And I understand they may say, well, he graded out bad last year in defensive wise on the Mets. The Mets had a lot of athletes in the outfield. Cedric Mullins may not be the greatest of hitters. He's not the worst outfielder. Tyron Taylor, we all see what he can do. And Brandon Nimmo always has played a solid left field, being a former center fielder, and nobody else really played out there consistently to qualify for that. So obviously Juan Soto is going to be the worst of them. And I know that the Mets supposedly had him practicing there, here or there. if they also let him go and they transition Juan Soto, that's a permanent thing. And the Mets have a top 5 prospect that they love in Ryan Clifford down in AAA, who could potentially see at bats next year at the major league level, a lefty first baseman, and that's all he is. So if you move Juan Soto to the first base, that tells me that a bigger move could be coming with Ryan Clifford being on the move that I wouldn't like to see, but maybe let's see what kind of player they would get in return. But you're making that decision that would not be temporary, that would be permanent.
Up an outfield, a corner outfield spot for a better outfielder and also a good hitter. So you're able to add offense while improving your defense. Listen, just getting Pete Alonso out of first, and getting Juan Soto out of right field improves your defense right there. This is not like an unprecedented move. Bryce Harper did this, a star of Juan Soto's calibers.
Also, let's not forget, Bryce Harper did it mostly because of injury. Remember, he hurt his arm? He couldn't throw a damn ball. That's why he did it.
Certainly, he did it for the good of the overall team, and now he's a really good first baseman.
I wouldn't say good for the team. He was injured.
He really applied himself to learning first base, and people say he's like a Gold Glove caliber first baseman.
I wouldn't go that far.
And it's allowed him to prolong his defensive career and keep his bat in the lineup even when his arm has been hurt. I mean, they did that for injury reasons, and now that's just his position going forward. That would be a great move for Juan Soto, even if 10 years from now he's DHing.
Ask the Philly fans how they like Nick Castellanos out in right field. Oh, wait.
You still get a decade of having that DH spot available for roster flexibility.
Again, I am not totally sold on moving Juan Soto. I think that would have been a conversation that would have been had the year prior. And I don't know. You have to convince a guy like Juan Soto to make a move like that. You can't just say, oh, you're going to show up and play first base. That's not happening. The guy's got the longest contract on the team, 14 years left. I highly doubt this would happen. I think if the Mets lost Pete Alonso, they would pivot to guys like Naylor, potentially a Ryan Clifford, maybe a trade, maybe one of the other first basemen out there. Dare I say, Cody Bellinger, as we watch the New York Mets get eliminated. I think the Mets would pivot to a guy like that. You want to prioritize defense, and you're going to be willing to let Pete walk, as you saw our friend John Harper and the folks over at SNY, including Sal Licata, said that he can't be a full-time first baseman in the long term, even after going into next year potentially, because of the issues with throwing. It solves that if Pete Alonso is willing to be a DH, depending on what the market determines. Everybody thinks Pete Alonso is going to have a glowing market when he didn't have one last year. Now that he's a year older, although he did have a better year last year, I'm not totally sold on that this will be a robust market for Pete Alonso. Maybe it comes back to the Mets again, where they're able to retain him, have him be a DH, and maybe you target a guy like a Cody Bellinger, Josh Naylor, or somebody of that ilk, where you get a better defensive first baseman, and then maybe you pivot to a full-time DH. If somebody offers Pete Alonso a massive contract, dare I say a guy like Kyle Schwarber you potentially could bring in, that's always an option over there for the New York Mets. But that's all I got for you guys today. Make sure you smash the like button, leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts. Should the Mets entertain moving Juan Soto to first base this season if they lose Pete Alonso, which I can't believe I'm even saying, but that's the reality that we're dealing in, folks. That is an absolute possibility. And after that, make sure you check out this video right here on the screen. Dan Bartels lets you know of a pitcher that the Mets must get involved in, who could pretty much cure all of this rotations issues and would immediately become the New York Mets' #1 ace on this staff. God bless. Take care. See you in the next video.